We're going to go through, we're going to read our story now, and then afterwards we'll answer our questions. Again, since we read the questions first, we kind of already know what to be on the lookout for, but if you get to the questions and you don't remember what part of the story this was from, or you don't remember it exactly, go back and read the story. Never be afraid to just go back to the story, read it again. That's the whole reason why it stays there for you. That's why it doesn't just disappear, get taken away, or deleted when you. The story is called Native Americans of the Great Plains. The Great Plains of Texas is an area of flat land that sits at a higher elevation or height than the Central Plains. Like the Central Plains, this region has hot summers. Winters in the Great Plains, however, are far colder. It has major rivers and breathtaking canyons. This scenic region was once home to the Lipan Apache and Comanche Native American groups. So they're telling us they call them the Great Plains. A plains is just flat land. There might be a few bumps here and there, but it's just pretty flat. They call these the Great Plains because of the elevation. It's higher up than the Central Plains, which are next to it. It says that the summers can get pretty hot and the winters can get very cold, probably because they are at a higher elevation. It also has some rivers, it's got some canyons, so it sounds like a very nice place. And they tell us about two Native American groups that live there, the Lipan Apache and the Comanche Native American. The Lipan Apache were nomadic farmers and buffalo hunters. They were among the first Native Americans to learn to ride horses. They used these equestrian skills not only to hunt buffalo, but to raid other Native American groups when their own supplies became scarce. We'll continue on to the next page in a bit, but they're telling us a little about the Apache. So it says that they were nomadic. Last time we read about the Native Americans, we learned that nomadic means that they didn't stay in one place. They had to move from place. They told us that the Apache were a group of Native Americans that hunted. They hunted specifically buffalo. It does say they were farmers, so they did grow some of their food, but hunting buffalo was a major source of food for them and for other things as well. Just like we talked about last time. Because they had to hunt, they couldn't just stay in one place forever. If they stayed in one place forever and just kept hunting in that one place, eventually they would have got all the buffalo and there'd be no food or anything left for them. And like I said, buffalo wasn't just food for them, they were able to use it for a lot of other things. So they had to make sure that they went from place to place. They couldn't just stay in one place for forever. They also told us that the Apache were some of the first Native Americans to actually learn how to ride horses. So when people from Europe came over here, they brought horses with them. Native Americans, when they saw the people riding the horses, they learned how to ride the horses as well. And they were able to use those skills. They were uh, very good at riding the horses. And because of that, they were able to go and hunt the buffalo easier. They wouldn't have to walking on foot. They could just ride the horses to catch up to the buffalo. And also, it tells us that they would raid other Native American groups. So when they started running out of supplies and they needed things, and this was at a time where you couldn't just go down to Walmart or to Target to buy other things. You had to go and find things that you need. So they could go, and because they could ride horses and because they were faster, they were able to go to other Native American groups and take supplies from them so that they could have them. Their aggression and stealing turned neighboring groups like the Comanche into enemies. As the Comanche bands grew stronger, the Lipan Apache were forced to move further south into Spanish territory. So since they would go, and when they would run out of supplies, they would go and take it from other groups. Because of that, the groups that lived around them would be upset. They'd be upset that people were coming in and taking their things. that they had already gathered and gotten for themselves. So the Apache and the Comanche were enemies. They were fighting against each other. At first, the Apache didn't really have a problem with this, but then the Comanche groups started to become stronger and stronger. So the Apaches had to find other places. They had to move to other places to kind of stay away from the Comanche. They had to keep moving south and south and south. And the further south they went, they ended up having to go into Spanish territory, territory that was being controlled by people from Spain. Though attempts were made by the Lipan Apache and Spanish missionaries to coexist peacefully, ultimately, Lipan Apache were unhappy with life in Spanish territory. Because of their discontent, many conflicts arose. So when they first moved into the territory that was controlled by Spain, at first the people from Spain and the Apaches tried to live peacefully. They didn't want to fight with each other. But because living there made the Apaches so unhappy, they did end up having a lot of fights with the people from Spain. In the mid 1800s, many of the Lipan Apaches left Texas for Mexico. In Mexico, they joined with another group of Apache known as the Mescalero Apache. Both the Lipan Apaches and the Mescalero Apaches were eventually relocated by the U.S. Army to a reservation in Mexico. So this particular group of Apaches, they used to live here, Texas. Eventually, to get away from the Comanches, they moved into Spanish-controlled land. And to get away from the people from Spain, they moved further into Mexico. When they got further into Mexico, they joined up with another group of Apaches. But eventually, both of the groups of Apaches were moved by the U.S. government. So it says relocated. It means the U.S. Army made them move onto a reservation. Learned last time that reservations were pieces of land or chunks of land that were kind of saved for the Native Americans. Again, when people from Europe were coming over, in this case, they mentioned people from Spain, they would come over. They would go to these areas where the Native Americans used to live, and they would, see the land that they had, and they wanted it. And so they would try to either force the Native Americans to leave, or they would kind of make deals with them. They would say, well, if you give us this land, we'll leave you this land. That's what the reservations were. And so the U.S. Army made these two groups of Apaches move on to a reservation that's in New Mexico. And that's where their dependents still live today. So those reservations are still there even today. Like the Lipan Apache, the Comanche Indians were also nomadic buffalo hunters and skilled horsemen. So this is something that both tribes have in common. Both of them hunted buffalo, and both of them were actually pretty good at riding horses. The Comanche lived in teepees, large tents made of long poles covered with buffalo hides. So earlier I mentioned that when they would hunt the buffalo, that they would get more than just food from it. This is one of the things that I was talking about. When they would hunt the buffalo, it was something that was pretty difficult. It wasn't super easy for them to do. Now we can just kind of go again to Walmart or to Food King or Target or wherever and go and buy groceries. And it's not very hard to go into the store and grab vegetables from the shelves or find, hamburger meat or chicken or whatever it is that you want to eat. Before, they had to work a lot harder for their food. Buffaloes, I don't know if you've ever seen a buffalo or if you've ever seen like a cow in real life. They are very big animals. They are not small by any means. They're very, very large. Buffaloes are a lot like cows in that way. They're very large animals. They're very strong animals. If they're gonna walk up, they can't just walk up to the buffalo and go, "Mr. Buffalo, could you please just like die really quick so that way we could have some food?" And the buffalo would go, "Okay, sure, yeah," and just lay down. And that's not the way it works. They would have to hunt the buffalo. They'd have to chase it down. They'd have to fight it. They'd have to kill it. Again, these buffaloes were big animals, strong animals. So this was not something that was very, very easy for them. Because it wasn't very easy, they wanted to make sure that when they killed the buffalo, they got as much use as possible out of the buffalo. They would use it for food, like we've seen here, but they do other things as well. They mentioned about the teepees. So the teepees were like tents, and they would take these long poles made of wood, and they would wrap it with buffalo hide, which is buffalo skin, like leather. So for those of you, if you have like any shoes with leather or jackets with leather, or if mom or dad or brother or sister has leather shoes or leather jackets or things like that, they would take the skin of the buffalo. They would have to there's a process to it. They'd have to take off all the hair, the fur. They have to stretch it out, they have to dry it, but it creates leather. And if you have a leather jacket or leather shoes, you know that leather can be pretty tough. So they would take this leather and they would wrap it around these sticks. That way at night when they would go to sleep, if it was windy or if it was cold outside, it would kind of help to keep some of that cold wind out of their tent. That way it's a little more comfortable for them. They really tried to make sure that they could use everything from the buffalo. So they used it to make leather, which could help make the teepees. It could also help make their clothes and things like that. They were led by democratically chosen peace chiefs, the decision makers, and by war chiefs, battle. They were known for being expert traders and perhaps the fiercest warriors on the Great Plains. So they're telling us about kind of how they chose their leaders. They would have like votes. They would choose, okay, this is the person that we think is the best choice for the job. We think this person would make the best decisions. We think this person should be in charge. And they told us that they had two kinds of chiefs here. They had peace chiefs, which were the people who made the decisions, and then they had war chiefs. War chiefs were the people that when they had a battle, when they had a fight, those were the people kind of deciding, okay, how should we fight this battle, or what should, because they were known for being expert traders. So they were very good at trading people, saying, no, I have this, but we want something else. If we give you these things, what will you give us in return? So they were very good at that. And it says that they were possibly or perhaps the fiercest warriors on the Great Plains, which means that they were some of the hardest fighters there. So they wouldn't give up. They were very good at they were very good warriors. Yeah, kind of like that, Chase. So that would be like your peace chiefs. They would be like the government making the laws. They would decide what you're gonna do and that. The war chiefs were like well, like some of us, if we have mom or dad or brother or sister that's in the military, war chiefs are like the officers in the military that kind of tell the soldiers, okay, here's what we're gonna do. When we have a fight, we're gonna do this. Here's a plan. We're gonna go here or there, and we're gonna do things like that. That's the war chiefs deciding how to fight the battles through force. The Comanche were able to take over the best hunting grounds and keep both Spanish and American settlers away from these territories for a long while. So we have a good example here of how good they were, or how good they were at fighting, and how strong they were of warriors. They had control of the best hunting grounds, the best places to hunt the buffaloes, and they were able to fight two different groups of people at the same time. They fought the Spanish and the American settlers, and they kept both of them away from their hunting grounds. We can see that they really were very good warriors if they were able to fight not just one but two groups of people, and to keep both groups of people away at the same time. By 1875, however, the Comanche were severely weakened by the US military and were forced to moved to a reservation in Oklahoma's Indian Territory. So even though they were very good warriors, after a time, of course, they're fighting against two people. It kind of makes sense that after fighting two people for a while, they weren't able to fight quite as hard as they were. And once they were kind of weakened from fighting for such a long time, the military was able to make them move to a reservation. Again, a chunk of land that was saved for them. And they live in Oklahoma. That's where they were moved to. Although their way of life completely changed on the reservation, the Comanche remained unified during these difficult times and were eventually able to rebuild their society. Any of us that have moved, especially if it's a very big move, like from one city to another, or from one state to another, or even one country to another, we know that it's a very big difference, or it can be a very big difference. So these Native Americans were moved from one place to another, and even though it was such a big change, they were able to kind of stay together. And because they were able to stay together and stay working as one group, they were able to kind of get back a little bit to how their society was before. They were able to rebuild it. Today, there are about 10,000 Comanche alive and well in the United States. More than half of them continue to live in Oklahoma. Each year, Comanche from all over the U.S. gather for a powwow, a Native American celebration, to honor their proud culture and heritage. So it tells us that they are still around today, and that most of them still live in Oklahoma where they have that reservation. But not all of them do. So every year they have a celebration of Comanches. And they call that a powwow. So they all get together, they celebrate their culture, they celebrate their heritage. Now we can go back, have the 6 questions that we need to answer. We have question number 1. Describe the Great Plains of Texas and name 2 Native American groups that once lived there. Remember, that's a 2-part question. You have to describe the Great Plains, and you have to name 2 of the Native American groups that used to live there. Number 2, name 2 ways that the Comanche and the Apache groups were similar. So they want not just one way, but 2 different ways that these groups were the same. 2 things that they had in common. Number 3, what is a teepee? So find the part of the story where they talk about teepees and just write down what is it. They talk about teepees, what are they talking about? Number 4, what is a powwow? Same thing, go and find in the story where they talk about a powwow and just write down what is it. Question 5, do you think the Comanche or the Apaches were stronger? Why? So that's another 2-part question. You have to answer first, which group do you think was stronger? The Comanche group stronger or the Apache group stronger? Second part, why do you think that? Why do you think that the group you said was stronger? Why not the other group? Question 6, how do you think life might have been different for Lipan Apaches when they were forced to move onto Spanish territory? We read in that passage that they were forced to move, and they had to move into Spanish territory. And when they did, how do you think life changed for them? To which one, Messiah? Do you mean to any of the questions? There's wrong ways to answer those. Again, you want to make sure that when you're putting down an answer, you want to be able to go back into your story and find proof. Oh, this one? Do you think the Comanche or Apaches were stronger? There's not exactly a wrong answer as far as one of them is obviously stronger than the other, but the reason could make it wrong or right. So if you say let's say Messiah, and I'm just gonna use the groups from yesterday. That way I don't change anyone's mind or anything. But last week we did a similar passage on the Kado and the Karankawa. If you told me, oh, the Kado are stronger because I like them more, that would be a wrong answer, because just because you like something doesn't make it stronger. Or if you say, oh, the Karankawa are stronger because their name is longer. So there's not really a wrong answer as far as which one was stronger, but depending on what reason you try to use, it could be wrong. If you try to give a reason that makes no sense, then yeah, that would be wrong. So long as your reason makes sense, I think it would be okay. Again, if you're not sure, if you don't remember, don't just try to pull it from your memory. Go back to the story. Look through it again. A good thing to do is just like we do when we have our DCRs. Take the lines, underline parts that show proof. That way you know, and you're proving to not just me but to yourself, look, the answer is right here. I know this is the correct